If it isn't my favorite Scotsman, yet again.
Well, yes, like a bad penny, I keep turning up.
Oh, we always love having you.
Thank
Sincerely.
you.
Okay, so we've got a huge amount to cover. We've got John, got all of Nehemiah, the last half of Esther that was sort of a weird, here, let's do Esther. Oh, wait, never mind, kind of thing that was from back in the early days of the Apocrypha. We will start off in John, and I'm kind of excited about this because the epistles go so fast and they're so little, and yet they're so dense. And yet these books are a bit longer, bit more to them. I did go and get a parallel Bible. Check this monster beast out. Look at this thing.
How thick is that?
Right? It's the 1971 edition of the Layman's Parallel Bible, and it has King James, Modern Language, the Living Bible, and Revised Standard. So we don't even have any new Revised Standard. We just have Revised Standard. Okay, so off we go on our canter. John 1. Do you have anything in John 1?
John 1, yes, just the overall imagery in John 1, 1 and 2. In the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was God in the beginning. Through him, all things were made. Just reading that just struck me. Here we are recording this just as in Advent, and we're talking about Jesus being there at the very beginning. He is the Word, capital W. And it struck me through all the readings of this that through him, all things were made. No wonder he was a carpenter. He's used to making things.
Oh, that's a good one. I like that. Yeah, these are probably the most famous opener of the Gospels, and significant in that we don't think of that. I think humans, we're so time bound and linear that we can't. And there's actually a verse. I'll start off because this is exactly what you're talking about. This is in 15, and I'd like to read it in both because I read either ESV or NRSV, maybe last week. I don't remember. I just pick up whichever Bible's closest. And this is John 15 in RSV. John bore witness to him and cried, "This was he of whom I said, 'He who comes after me ranks before me, for he was before me.'" Okay, so it's pretty formal language. Now, this is the Living Bible. Again, I'm not advocating for one or the other. I'm advocating for both. So this says, pointed him out to the people, telling the crowds, "This is the one I was talking about when I said, 'Someone is coming who is greater by far than I am, for he existed long before I did.'" Right there. And I genuinely don't feel, there are a couple of occasions, I found two in this section of John that we read, there it does slightly change, and you go, I don't know about that, right? With the meaning, which is why I like both versions. But every once in a while, the New Living for a person in the modern world, it does illuminate it a little bit easier for someone to understand. He existed long before I did. Now, that is exactly what "he was before me" means, and what the opening verses 1 and 2 that you just pointed out says. But here it is a little bit plainer. He existed long before I did, which, this is John the Baptist, is Jesus's cousin, and is what, 3 months, 6 months older than Jesus? So you kind of go, huh? There was one more little tidbit before we flip over to chapter 2, but this again, same thing here. Really helpful to a modern reader. In 19, it says in the Living Translation, "The Jewish leaders sent priests and assistant priests from Jerusalem." And I was like, oh, the Levites. Okay. Because it says Pharisees and Levites. And I kind of thought, okay, again, does that change the meaning? Possibly, but not really. Like, they're not Pharisees. It was a Pharisees and Levites. So it's not just all Pharisees, but it was kind of funny to me because that's what someone thought of as a modern version of it, as an assistance leader. I was like, okay, well, anyway.
I was just going to jump to John 1, 46, 48. And in there, there's a bit of a running gag that is this comedy moment, frankly, that runs all the way through the whole of the Bible. Nazareth, can anything good come from there? There's some in joke. I know it was some curse or whatever that was said, Nazareth. And everyone, you can just imagine the whole crowd going, "Can anything good come?" So Nathaniel picks up on that gag, because in 46, he says, "Nazareth, can anything good come from there?" And Philip doesn't engage with him and try and batter down the argument. He just says, come and see. And I really get this next one, 47. Jesus saw Nathanael approaching, and he says to him, here truly is an Israelite in whom there is no deceit. How do you know me? Nathanael asked, and Jesus answered, I saw you while you were still under the fig tree. Now, why does this get me excited? Well, I referenced my good old brother, the scholar, the one who does Greek, and he said the Greek word for know, or for seeing rather, is eido, in the original Greek translation, eido, which means seeing that becomes knowing. So it carries a sense of moving directly from the physical sight and physically seeing somebody to spiritually seeing them, really knowing and understanding them. So seeing, eido, is not just physically seeing them, but is also this link to the spiritual side. And Jesus sees us not just physically, but spiritually. He knows everything about us. So Nathanael's going, how do you know me? And Jesus says, I saw you, I see you, I understand you, even before you came to me. And that so got me a bit excited there.
It's a good one because you do think, well, how does that mean he knows him if he saw him? Right? Like literally,
Yeah.
that's the question when you're reading it. And he goes in, he says, I saw you under the fig tree. Well, that's not how do you know me? Like, how do you know the very fact this is an Israelite of an upstanding man? Like, where did you get that? And that is what you've just explained in terms of the Greek that language translation somewhat loses, I think.
Nathanael, I think, is on a roll because straight after in 1551, Jesus says, you believe me because I told you I saw you under the fig tree. And then he says, very truly I tell you, you will see heaven open and the angels of God ascending and descending on the Son of Man. And that flips us straight back to Genesis 28, because that's Jacob's dream, where Jacob's running away. He sleeps with Jacob's pillow, the stone, and he dreams of this ladder up and down to heaven, where the angels are going up and down, this providing access to and from heaven. And here Jesus is saying, I am the ladder. That's me.
True. Very true. Very prominent one, especially for what the unseen realm is versus the seen realm, which is exactly what this verb is talking about here, in that we don't see with spiritual eyes as often. We see what's physically in front of us, and we don't necessarily pay enough attention to what our spirits sense or what our spirits can see. Again, it's not seeing with an eyeball seeing, but it is seeing as in knowing, understanding, feeling the presence of it's whether evil or good, right? You can feel something and have a sense that it's there, but your eyeballs don't see it. It's a good one. Before we carry on, I wanted to go a little bit backwards, and you and I have had a little bit of a chat about this, but this is where, again, the two versions illuminate this. So this is John 1:26. In the Living Bible says, John told them, I merely baptize with water, but right here in the crowd is someone you have never met who will soon begin his ministry among you. And so I was like, wait, what? What? And I had this, I was getting like 6 Bibles out last night and going, wait a minute, Jesus was there standing, was he, and then I read all the other versions and it says, so in Revised Standard, that little section says, but among you stands one whom you do not know. So I kind of thought, well, no, among you just means around, about. He's vogue right now in Israel at that time. People had heard of him because then later on in the same chapter, John's disciples are kind of like, well, he's getting all the glory. And John's like, yeah, give him the glory. This is what I'm supposed to become less. He's supposed to be more. I then, and you challenged me on this. I was like, okay, it doesn't necessarily mean that he was there.
My brother was once presenting on something, and I was in the crowd at the front, and I did not want to catch his eye because I did not want to distract him. He was presenting on something, and if I'd said, hiya, bro, it's me, here to support you, he may have carried on talking, or he may have been distracted and said, sorry, what? Oh, I've lost my train of thought. I could speak to him anytime, but he only had that one chance to address in that one presentation. So I can understand if Jesus is in the crowd, but not making himself necessarily aware to John. John may have seen him as he's talking to the crowd. He may recognize him, but they're not interacting. And so John could say, there is one amongst us. You don't know him yet. Or John could be just saying, there is somebody, and not realizing that Jesus is physically there as well. So yeah, that's my take on it.
Well, and also the dove. And then if you go down to 33, this is again the same theme here. It says in the Revised Standard, I myself did not know him. And then 33, I did not know he was the one.
So in that one, you're thinking, well, John, how did you not know that it was Jesus? Because you're cousins, right? And when Mary went to Elizabeth, John, that's your mum, Elizabeth. And Elizabeth said, you're bearing the Messiah. So your mum would have talked about it as you grew up. How could you not know? But at the same time, Mary, any Roman Catholics watching, forgive me if I'm cutting across part of your ideology, whether Mary had other children or was she truly the Virgin Mary for her whole life. Notwithstanding that, James, who was Jesus' half-brother, he only came to faith, only came to believe in Jesus as the Son of God after Jesus' death and resurrection. So James had grown up in the same house as Jesus and still didn't see him for who he truly was. So if James didn't, understandably why John may not necessarily have seen him or known him.
Exactly. I've been fascinated by this whole, my parallel themes of having a couple different versions. It's just been super illuminating because, again, and I feel like this is the transforming power of God, is that what Satan meant for evil, bunches of different versions, copyrights, and this, that, and the other, God says, I will help you by giving you a bunch of different words, a bunch of different ways to state it that will actually illuminate the whole.
Yeah.
Alrighty.
Yeah.
Carrying on. 17. Then his disciples remembered this prophecy from the scriptures. Concern for God's house will be my undoing. And I find it funny that, and most of the time they didn't get it on that side of it, just like James, his brother, didn't. It didn't come until the other side of his crucifixion. But here's one where they do. They go, oh, wait, all right, here, this makes sense. But there's so much that he says, and we'll get to this later on in John. There's so much that he says that is hard, difficult to understand. And we often as humans, you turn around and you look at the Israelites and you say, oh, you grumbling such and such is. Right here, total grumbler. Yes, this is me. I do the same thing. And we often look at disciples and be like, well, dude, hello, open your eyes. It's your half brother. Why didn't you pay attention? Disciples, you walked with him for 3 years. Why didn't you know? It's not as obvious as people think from our perspective later on, being able to look into the story.
Yeah. In 14 and 15, it mentions just as Moses lifted up the snake in the wilderness, so the Son of Man must be lifted up, that everyone who believes in him have eternal life. So in Numbers 21:9, Moses made a bronze snake and put it on a pole, lifted the pole up, and anyone who had been bitten by a snake looked at the bronze snake and they lived. And so it's a reference to that. And Jesus saying, I will be raised up on a pole, on a cross, so that people will live.
Often people say, oh, okay, they read the New Testament and they're like, oh, I don't want that old stuffy stuff. We don't need to do the Levitical laws or anything. Well, actually, those are the foreshadowings of the New Testament, and it's all fulfilled. And it's kind of weird because you sort of think, okay, you're making an image, a graven image, which is what God told us not to do. And then he raises this snake up on a pole. And it's confusing until you add the New Testament in and think, oh, okay, this is, again, a foreshadowing, just like Jonah, 3 days in the belly of a fish. Jesus, 3 days. There's so much that confirms that he is Messiah, not was, is Messiah, and that he is the fulfillment of all of these things. And yet you often truck through it and go, this is a bunch of names. This is a bunch of gross, who's so-and-so begets so-and-so. And let me tell you, people, reading Nehemiah, my tongue twister self. Oh my goodness. It's quite challenging.
But it's a bit like, as a Brit, watching the American Super Bowl. You watch Super Bowl final and that's it. It's an amazing spectacle. But why these two teams? How did they get there? That's the New Testament. You can look at all the Old Testament stuff of all the different leagues that they're in, the conferences or whatever. And even that is so confusing because half the time they seem to be playing a team that's not even in their conference and the points carry it. But if you don't see that, then suddenly there are two teams in the Super Bowl final and that's it. You can, like I say, you can watch that as a legitimate one-off occasion and it's great. But you can look into all the how did they get there stuff. There's my take.
Well, and I let me reverse that for you just a little bit for most Americans that would be watching this. It's like watching a game of rugby, and you kind of go, well, but okay, never mind. Or cricket, even cricket and baseball. It's like we've sort of taken the thing and gone wrong with it.
By the way, cricket is the only game where you can play hammer and tongs against each other for 5 days and it ends in a draw.
Right? Oh my goodness. All righty, moving on.
In John 4:7, when a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, "Will you give me a drink?" That has been absolutely my sort of personal logo, if you like, for when I was in private practice as an attorney. And it's, to me, it speaks of business development, that Jesus is at the well, the woman is at the well. What do they possibly have in common? I use that example myself in business development, where I would find a potential client, figure out what do we have in common. There's one I was idly Googling, needed to get a new client. And I came across this company that fitted the profile of where I thought I could help them. And in a bio of one of the directors, it said something about he lived in Indonesia. I used to live in Indonesia. So I emailed him out the blue, random, in Bahasa Indonesia, as you do, because that was the thing we had in common. So he emails back and says, well, what are you, this random person emailing me in a foreign language? We then struck up a conversation. We then became friends. He then did indeed give me instructions to become a great client, because I figured out what's the common link. So thank you, Samaritan lady. You inspired me.
Interesting. I knew you'd lived in Indonesia, but that's brilliant. I love that. I have something in 43, 44. Just a little comment at the end of 2 days. He went into Galilee. And this is this whole thing about, a prophet has no honor in his hometown. And much of his ministry was done in Galilee, not necessarily in Judea. And I find that interesting. My mother, I live in Colorado with mountains, and she says, yes, but you're landlocked. There's no water. And she lives in Michigan and there's a verse somewhere that talks about Jesus moving to Capernaum, which is on the edge of water. And I said, well, see, Jesus agrees with you.
Talking of
Okay.
water, John 6, or have you got anything else in 5?
Nope, go ahead.
So in John 6:19 and 20, they rowed out, this is the segue of water, rowed out about 3 or 4 miles. They saw Jesus approaching the boat, walking on water, and they were frightened. And he said to them, do not be afraid. Is there any way to read that except for the fact that Jesus just goes for an evening stroll? He's just out for a walk and thinks, water, land, it's all the same to me. Why does he do it? It's just for fun. It's just a fun thing he does. I think it's just hilarious.
It is. Well, in this occasion, he's walking, and then all of it, they're like, oh, get in the boat, because we can't fathom that you're walking on the water and not going to sink. So get in the boat. And then all of a sudden they're there. And I have had a fascination for many, many, many years. Some people want to raise the dead. I want to be translated. I think that would be so cool. Just like Philip, right? Like all of a sudden,
Yes.
you're in the
Yes.
different spot. So they're like, get in the boat, get in the boat. And they're all focused on getting Jesus into the boat. And then all of a sudden, they're at the shore and there's dry land for you, boys. It's just funny to me because that's the part that strikes me, not the fact that it's like, okay, why is a donkey talking? Why is a snake talking? And there's all these questions that you have in this book that does these funky things that elephants get drunk in. And yet here we are. He just zoop. And there you go. I have one more here if I can get to it. This is in 6:59. And what has happened here is that and the Jews are disputing the Pharisees, are disputing Jesus, and he's having this argument with them. But I love this last little bit. This he said in the synagogue as he taught in Capernaum. And so here it's like you didn't know where you were because of the whole, hey, go to, his brothers are like, are you going to go up? And he's like, no, I'm not. And then he does. And then he's preaching. And now all of a sudden we've switched back to Capernaum. And if you look at the Gospels, John is the one that seems to have he wrote it a little bit later than the others. And you can tell because his perspective is slightly different. not in a bad way, but just in a good sort of like reflecting on it years later. He's not telling the story in the moment. He's telling it from quite a few years back. And he's like, oh, by the way, that one was in the synagogue. And then you kind of, well, wait, did the setting, the scene changed on me, and I didn't realize it until that commentary. And I just think sometimes the gospels are a little bit difficult to follow because you think just, and this happened in Acts, you think this thing happened, then that thing happened. And yet in Acts, it's 12 years later, and this happened in Capernaum, not in Jerusalem. So I just thought it was kind of an interesting one of, you have to take each thing in and of itself and just roll with it without getting your knickers in a twist about, well, when was this? What? And I like that. I want the map. I want all the details. I want to see like the whole scene, like, okay, where are we? Who's there? What's going on? And it's like, just read the book, Beth. Just read the book.
But equally, what you have been doing of counting up the years involved and reminding us how many years will have passed in these, I find that really helpful because certainly, for example, reading Acts, as I've said before, it is just this rollicking roller coaster adventure story. It's fantastic. Almost it drags you through at top speed. And you're helping by saying, do you realize how long it took for all these events to happen? Whoa.
Yeah. It helped me, and I really want more Bible maps and things like this. But speaking of, we are headed to Nehemiah, and my favorite part of Nehemiah, I know you had some overviews, but I'm just going to dive in here because this is so funny to me. This is the original mic drop. So it's in chapter 1, he explains what he's doing, and then he says, dun, 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 this isn't just at the very end of 1, for I was the cupbearer to the king. And you just expect like big music or something. Please, Lord, help me, help me, help me. Give me the right words, the whole thing. Okay, mic drop it. Go, Nehemiah.
Yeah. And the overall theme, I suppose, for me with Nehemiah is it's a lesson in leadership. There's teamwork, there's project management, there's how to achieve a task. And if you bear that in mind when reading everything in Nehemiah, it really shows what he did in pulling it all together. And then you think, okay, so how did he start? Well, he started by crying, frankly, because right in 4 or 5, when I heard these things, I sat down and wept. And there's a distinction between a reaction and a response. A reaction is the immediate, what do you do? And the response is consider it. So his immediate, what do I do? Was I sat down and I wept. It was too overwhelming. Couldn't cope. And many of us, that's where we end. We start there, we end there, we cannot go on. But what does Nehemiah then do? Well, he has a response. For some days I mourned, I fasted, I prayed before the God of heaven, and then I said, and he goes into it. So his response is to fast, to pray, to formulate a plan in prayer, and then to approach the king. So he takes action after praying, or indeed praying is part of his action, and that's the whole response thing. So I really like this idea of react and response.
Well, he does get success. The king responds to him. But when the king says, okay, well, what do you need? He doesn't say, I don't know. I really want to go to Jerusalem. He has immediately all the details. But because later on in the end of Nehemiah, it says something goes wrong when he's not there because he's gone back to the king. And he's got a plan. He's got a whole, like, if I get success, then this is going to happen, that's going to happen. And he's actually made a plan in case he is successful, which I find really, he did do his homework.
Yeah. And don't for a minute think that he gets his plan and he thinks, that's it, we're sorted. I can kick back and relax now. Because in Nehemiah 2 and 3, he says, I was very much afraid, but I said to the king. So he's thinking the king could easily not just say, no, I'm not going to do this, but could say, you cheeky wee thing, I'm not having any of this. You're no longer my cupbearer, off to the dungeons with you or whatever. So we can be afraid, but plow on.
Yes, absolutely. And it doesn't mean that you're not afraid. You can be absolutely petrified, which we'll get to in Esther, and still do something, what you're supposed to do, and know that your action is to step forwards or to step out and you think, "Ooh, I don't know if this is going to go well. Is anyone even going to watch this channel when I read the Bible?" Well, who
Mm.
cares? Because God told you to do it, so go read the Bible. Okay. And it blesses me. So it doesn't matter if anyone's listening to it as I'm reading it. It's a matter of stepping out in faith when you feel like you're supposed to do something, no matter whether you've got fear or not.
Yeah. And there's also in verses 4 and 5 of Nehemiah 2, it shows an early example, good example of an arrow prayer. Don't know if you have that concept where it's rather than, as I am wont to do, a great big wordsmith, big long manuscript of a prayer in my head, and I deliver it, and it sounds wonderful up here. But an arrow prayer is just in the moment. God, I need you. Please help. And we're done. And in this one, the king said to me, "What do you want?" And again, you've got your building up to a crescendo music ready for the mic drop. The king says, "What do you want?" This could go two ways. And he says, "Then I prayed to the God of heaven and I answered the king." So he's clearly not going to say, "I'm going to pray for the next 5 hours and I'll get back to you." It's got to be a quick arrow prayer. "Lord,
Yeah.
help me answer this question to the king. Now, king, this
Well,
is
and
what I
and
want."
and he did, but that's what we were saying. He did do the plotting, planning, checking, like going through, okay, if he says yes, what am I going to do? How am I going to answer him? But you're right. In this moment, it's like, okay, he's got the attention. What do you want? Right? The king sort of looks to him and says, okay, the question is asked. And I would imagine, and I don't know this is me surmising here, but when you're talking to someone important, you better have your 30-second elevator pitch. You better have boom, boom, boom. This is what I need, right? Because he's not going to sit there and talk to you for half an hour. He's not going to say, "Oh, we'll have a meeting next week." He says, "What do you want?" "I want to go to Jerusalem and fix this." And then he's got a little bit more of information. Then the king says, "Well, how long are you going to be gone?" So they do have a little bit of a conversation, but it's not long. You've still got to get your information across quickly. This is an important guy. This is the king. So therefore, you're going to have to have it ready to go. And so the prayer and fasting that he had done earlier, I believe, leads to but you're right. He still adds this extra quick, like, "Okay, Lord, boom."
Yeah. Absolutely. And then you were saying about he gets the engagement of the king, and the king is saying, "What else do you need?" and so on. So in 7:9, he says, "I also said to him, if it pleases the king, may I have letters to the governors of the Euphrates?" So he's looking for a safe passage. This is all logistics. So this gets back to my idea of project management, of leadership, that he's not just saying, "I want to rebuild the wall." He's thinking, how do I rebuild the wall? What resources do I need for it? How do I get there? How do I get other people there? He's thinking the whole thing through. And he's getting the king to think through the whole task as well. And it ends up with the king suggesting things. "Have you thought about this? Would you like that?" And never look a gift horse in the mouth. So Nehemiah's going, "Oh yeah, that'd be great. Thanks very much."
Right. Well, and I love, and this is probably for more for next week, but I love where when Ezra's like, "But I was afraid to ask for extra." It's like, okay, Lord, protect the journey because I didn't ask for that. And Nehemiah is with it. The king offers, but he then says, "Yep, let's take all of that." Spoiler alert for everyone. They've already read it, but they get it done in like 52 days. That's crazy. It's amazing, with wearing clothes while they're working, with swords, with all the interference from Sanballat and Tobiah, and they still record time. And that is one of the testimonies for the Jews to the rest of the world. Hey, our God's with us. Watch this. And yet they boast in God. They don't boast in their own abilities of, "Hey, we sussed this." I mean, Nehemiah planned, he had the resources, but at the same time, it is God that equipped him to get it done that fast and that quickly.
Yeah,
All right.
absolutely. And it's not all plain sailing, because when Sanballat
Yes.
and Tobiah hear about this, they're disturbed that someone has come to promote the welfare of the Israelites. So there is opposition. Again, it shows that it's not just, "I've got the plan, the king's agreed, and we're done." There's hard work involved in it, and there's opposition.
I also find it funny that, and I don't actually have this noted, but I remember particularly it's so and so's related to so and so because it's the daughter in law of the whatever. But it's like, this is political intrigue in the highest form, because what Nehemiah is trying to do is to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem and make everything tip top shape. And yet Tobiah is related to so and so, and so they're literally a person's talking to Nehemiah, and then they go tell Tobiah everything that he just said. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. Meantime, Nehemiah is he's still active. By night, this is on 13:16. By night, I went out through the valley gate toward the jackal well and the dung gate, examining the walls of Jerusalem. So he's doing what we call recce. I believe the Americans call it reconnaissance.
Yep.
Don't declare your hand too soon, and time spent in reconnaissance is seldom wasted. So he's going out
Mm.
looking to inspect what's coming next, what's in the pipeline for me.
Well,
Again,
and
project.
he doesn't even get the people that are going to do the building. He doesn't rally them. He goes and takes the recce first.
Yes. And then once he's done that recce, that recon, he can then take the people with him because he says to them, you see the trouble we're in. Jerusalem lies in ruins. Its gates have been burned with fire. Come, let us rebuild the wall. And they say, let us start rebuilding. So he gets buy-in from the team. Again, brilliant leadership. Finishing off in Nehemiah 2 and 19, when Sanballat, our baddie, and Tobiah, the other baddie, and Geshem, the Arab, heard about all this, they mocked and ridiculed us. And they said, what are you doing? Are you rebelling against the king? So opposition usually comes from a position of ignorance because they mock and ridicule. Where's the facts? Where is the detail of this is what you have done that is wrong? They don't know that because they can't see that. So they're just mocking and ridiculing.
Mm.
And in fact, they're saying, are you rebelling against the king? But it was the king himself who authorized it. So if they were not rebuilding the wall, that would have been rebelling against the king. Just imagine what Nehemiah is thinking is they're saying to him, we're going to tell the king on you. And he's going, but it's the king that told me to do this. You're so wrong.
Yeah. Well, go ahead, rumble me. I don't care. I know I'm ready. And they send all these letters, and there's this flurry of activity, and they're trying so hard to thwart him. And again, that comes back to Nehemiah 1 of his fasting and his planning. I don't know that he would have thought, oh, I'm going to have interference. But I think he did say, okay, I've got to get all of this planned out correctly in order for it to get permissions, to get all my things in order. And then it's when someone comes against him, he just kind of goes, I'm done, boys. I'm good.
Moving swift on to Nehemiah 3, all of that, it talks about each gate was rebuilt. And again, this is leadership. This is project management. Split the tasks down into manageable portions. You've got an entire city wall to rebuild. Where do you start? Start at the beginning and do little bits. Delegate tasks to subgroups. Love his leadership. It's an example of that in 6 and 7, where the Jeshanah gate was repaired by Joidas, son of Paseah, and Meshullam. So they laid its beams, put its doors with the bolts and bars in place. Next to them, repairs were made from the men from Gibeon and Mizpah, places under the authority of the governor. So it's an example of different teams working together. So they're side by side, they're different teams, but they're interacting so that the overall job can be done. And then some have got a personal stake in it. Adjoining this, Jediah, son of Haramoth, made repairs opposite his house. So he's really going to want the wall strengthened and made secure because it's right in front of his house. His house is a danger if he doesn't, is at risk if he doesn't do it properly. And Shalom, son of Haloasheh, ruler of the half district, he repaired the next section with the help of his daughters. So his daughters worked. This was work for everyone. There is not a time to be petty and say who could or could not be invited to do it. It was just, can you do it? Then do it. Everyone was involved.
Absolutely.
I'm jumping on to Nehemiah 4 and up to the bad guy, Sanballat, heard they were rebuilding the wall. He became angry and was greatly incensed. Again, he ridiculed the Jews. So the enemy will find common cause. Insults not based on fact. They're distorted. So what does Nehemiah do about that? Well, therefore, I stationed some of the people behind the lowest points of the wall at the exposed places, posting them by families with their swords and spears. So the leader will examine first, make a judgment, and then will act and encourage. So he does all that, and he says, don't be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, who is great and awesome, and fight for your families. your sons, your daughters, your wives, your homes. So he's saying you've all got a personal stake in this. So he's really encouraging. Again, classic good leadership. When I heard their outcrying these charges, I was angry. I told him, you're charging your own people interest. So he's heard that people are making a fast buck in a time of need. And he's saying, this is not the time for this sort of thing. And he even talks about you're charging your own people interest. And then we've bought back our fellow Jews who are being sold to the Gentiles. So he's saying, you're selling your own people, having come from slavery yourselves, and now you're going back into it. There's much sacrifice, for example, sacrificing their own people back into slavery. But that reminds me of last time I was on here, Proverbs 21:3. To do what is right and just is more acceptable to the Lord than the sacrifice. So the people could be sacrificing some people, selling them into slavery or selling them short or making a sacrifice to try and get the job done. And God's going, I'm not interested in that. I just want you to do what is right and be just to each other.
Well, and Jews were not meant to charge one another, usually. That was never appropriate. You could charge a heathen, a Gentile, you could charge someone that wasn't one of your brothers, but you couldn't charge your brothers. And so this is where I love that he not only rebukes them, but then he's like, okay, let's make a vow about that. Let's have you sign on the dotted line and say, I'm not going to do this again.
Yeah.
He
Yeah.
really puts their feet to the fire, if you will.
And that's another good segue into, okay, what does Nehemiah want out of this? What does he get out of it? And that's in Nehemiah 5:19, when he says, remember me with favor, my God, for all I've done for these people. So what does he want out of it? Material riches? Nope. Place of power? Nope. Just for the Lord to remember him with favor and think, yeah, you did what you could for me. Well done.
Well, and before we move on to Esther, that is really important in that he talks about the governor's salary and he never charged it. And he goes at the very end of Nehemiah about all the things that were done and he funded them, he himself, without tapping the people and the taxes that should have been on the people, that because of this oppressive government that is over them with the Babylonians, he says, nope, I got it. No problem.
Yeah.
Just a
Yeah,
little.
very briefly in Nehemiah 9, it shows the yo-yo mentality. They were disobedient and rebelled against you. They turned their backs on your law. They killed your prophets. Everything goes well. We tend to ignore God and we think, we don't need him anymore. I'm doing quite well enough. Thank you very much. He, meantime, hears us and has compassion for us, and he acts. He rescues us. He is faithful to us, even though we swing like a pendulum as to our favors.
I do want to echo back a little bit to the Apocrypha in the fact that there are pieces in here, the way that I've read this, that are not in a Protestant Bible. And I don't, it doesn't take away anything if they're not there. And I don't think, I mean, does it add little tidbits about Mordecai's dream? Sure, that's about the most significant, that he had a dream and God speaks to Joseph in a dream. So entirely plausible, reasonable. I don't know that that changes the actual story of Haman the baddie. And of course, the big thing when the king is so mad that he has to go for a walk. And then the minute that he steps back into the room, Haman's thrown himself physically on the couch. And one version, and this is where this is funny because obviously the Bible is quite saucy. And in the living version, it does say that, is she about to rape the queen? And I was like, oh my gosh, because that's not in the other versions. It says assault the queen. But I mean, you can only imagine. And in this, you don't feel bad for the baddie because he really was the baddie, but yet he is pleading for his life. And so he's throwing himself on the couch. But what that is interpreted to is you are just going to be impaled right now.
Yeah. And I can understand that, again, as a Brit, we have the royal family. You do not touch or approach the royal family unless they come to you first. And it's probably very hard to describe when we see around the world and people, maybe they don't mean it, but they will put their arm around, particularly the late Queen, Queen Elizabeth II. There's a couple of times when statesmen put their arm around her and you just think, no, don't do that. It annoys us. And that's just, just us as ordinary people. So I can understand the king getting in and saying, "What's going on here?" And then this black veil being thrown over Haman's face. That is a symbol of you are removed from humanity. You don't have identity anymore. The death penalty is on you immediately. So it's
Well,
dramatic.
and I love the fact that they use the eunuch who says, "There's a gallows that was meant for Mordecai, who he honored this morning. Let's use it on him." It's so poetic. It's so beautiful. And even when Haman rushes off to the second banquet, his family says, "Dude, you're cooked."
Yeah,
But they end up cooked. And
yeah,
they are the ones that gave the idea originally, because he's moaning and saying, "Oh, well, I want to be bowed down to, and Mordecai won't do it." And they say, "Well, all right, let's get him." And
yeah,
that is exactly what happens. It gets turned on its head. And this is, again, a precursor foreshadowing of Jesus and his ministry of reconciliation and turning Adam's sin on its head. It's, hey, this was meant for evil. And actually, Purim is a celebration of, hey, we didn't get annihilated. In fact, we got to annihilate them.
yeah, yeah. That eunuch, when he says it's not just any gallows, it's a 50-cubit gallows. I looked up a cubit is, if I can do this, is the measurement from the tip of the elbow to the tip of the hand, and it's described as 6 palms and 4 fingers. So if you get a palm from the tip of the elbow, 1, 2, 3, 4, and well, measuring them up just the palms, you get 6, and then 4 fingers right at the very top, and that's a full cubit. So 52 of them. That's how tall the gallows were.
Well, and you're not a short chap. So that's a long,
Yeah.
well, and again, raised up. This is where
Yes.
we came back to the bronze serpent. Not obviously Haman is annihilated on it, but I'm just saying that looking up, and that's what he wanted to do to Mordecai. And yet, through Jesus' sacrifice, that is then covered over and we are forgiven.
Yep. And what you were saying also about the annihilation and how the Jews ended up being able to say, well, we've not been annihilated, and in fact we've turned the other foot, if you were. Esther 7, 8 and 11, the king saying, "You for your part, write what you please as regard the Jews in the king's name and seal it with the king's signet. For any edict written in the king's name and sealed with his signet is irrevocable." So the king can't say, "Sorry, folks, I made a mistake. My bad." He's got to be seen as being the king. He never makes mistakes. So
Yeah. Right.
it's an intriguing narrative, the way that Esther works out how can she get round what the king has already written
Well,
without
and
saying,
she comes to him. It's a very interesting thing because she's like, "Get rid of this, take it back." And he loves Esther. His wrath has been a little bit dampened because Haman's dead. But she's saying, "Okay, the problem still remains, husband. I might be safe, but my people are not, and take it back." And he carefully, do whatever you need to do. He said, can't be taken back because the
yeah,
king doesn't make
yeah,
mistakes. He's King Artaxerxes and all the 127 provinces and whatnot. He doesn't make mistakes.
yeah. But Esther is clever. And what she does is to figure out a way around it. So she said, okay, so on this day, people can take up arms and strike against the Jews. Okay, what I'm going to say is the Jews are allowed to fight back. In fact, they can have what John Foster Dulles called preventive retaliation. They can, they can stick it first.
Yep.
And so she rewrites that scenario such that the Jews are able to band together with weapons and fight back, to defend themselves by fighting back. And everyone is thinking, this is going to be easy. We're just going to do the work of Haman commanded and annihilate them, everyone, like taking candy from a baby. And Esther's going, au contraire, it's not.
She literally faints when he hands out the scepter the first time because she's there. She's got maids. She's taken off her sackcloth and ashes and she's, gotten foxy. And she goes up there and she literally, when he realizes that she's come without a request, whoa, this is serious. And then she faints. But again, that echoes Nehemiah of, you can be afraid, you still need to step out and act.
Yeah,
Well,
absolutely.
I think we're there.
That's been intense.
And this is what's so funny about the rhythms of how this has gone. Not what I planned, not the way that I thought about it, but the way that the Lord wanted it. We'll see you again.
Absolutely.